Welcome back to the Hero Report. My name is Ari Cohen. I am an associate professor at the University of Nebraska and the director of the Forsyth Family Program on Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs. With me, as always, is Matt Langdon, and this week our guest is Mike Dilbeck. I'll turn it over to Matt for his introduction.
All right, thanks, Ari. My name is Matt Langdon. I am the head of the Hero Construction Company, a program that teaches kids to be heroes. And today we have Mike Dilbeck of the Responsibility Project, and he's here to talk to us about how he's using heroism and heroes in his new work. So Mike, if you just give us a brief introduction onto who you are, what you're doing, and then we'll throw some questions at you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I'll just go ahead and do a shameless plug for my website in case you want to be there while you're watching this. It'll be a great reference. It's raproject.org. Again, that's raproject.org, and it might be a useful reference for you while I'm speaking. So I am the founder and let me look up. I get used to this. I'm the founder and the president of the Responsibility Project, which was just mentioned, but I'm also the founder of a new initiative I'm going to tell you about in just a second. But the Responsibility Project is a national initiative to empower people to intervene in problem situations and to be an everyday hero in that moment. Now, we included that everyday hero language because of our new campaign called the Everyday Hero Campaign. So let me kind of give you some history on how that came about, and I'll be brief on that. I've been traveling the country now for 3 years speaking, mainly and primarily to college students, about bystander behavior, about bystander intervention, and about doing the right thing in the right moment. And while there's certainly those that get it and that wrap their heads and their hearts around it and take it and run with it, I've been struggling with for the past 3 years, and I also have about 400 facilitators around the country that do the same thing on a smaller scale than I do it, but they deal with the same thing of it's hard for people to get this concept of bystander behavior. First of all, it has kind of an academic sound to it, so if people can't, grab that, then that's an obstacle. So it's a little bit of a technical word that people kind of are thrown by. And even, still, it's also a conversation we don't necessarily like to be in. We don't like to see things that we haven't done. We don't like to feel worse about ourselves, which people naturally go to that place. It becomes one more thing to beat themselves up for. Oh, I didn't do that. I'm a bad, awful, wrong person. We don't like to think of those things. We like to tuck them away and, denial, right? And even though we really never forget them. And so I've been struggling with what's the right way to approach this conversation. What's like the right angle, the right hook that will get people engaged in a way that they're not necessarily being engaged right now. And it was a moment this past summer where I was kind of doing a self-inventory of how things were going. Am I making the impact I want to make? How's this project going? That I really got, for the first time really in 3 years, that we've really been attempting to inspire and empower people to not be something, to not do something. And that takes a lot because we're not wired that way as human beings. You could actually say and take the case that we're wired to be inspired to be something, to do something, to take an action. We get inspired by that, the possibility of something, not the negative, the don't do this. We want to hear, how can I be this? How can I do this? That I really already want to do. I already want to be successful. I already want to make a difference. I already want to be a great parent. I already want to be a great employee. And that's what we're inspired by. But taking the other approach, kind of the flip side of the coin, it takes much more to do that, to not be something. So I took my same message, still the same content of intervening in problem situations, and came from it from the different angle, and that is being an everyday hero. Now, I'm using the double entendre of everyday. I use it as one word with a line down between every and day, because I really mean for it to be one word and 2 words. First of all, one word, every day. Just everyday, average, ordinary people like you, like me, doing heroic things for people, for organizations, or for issues we care about. But also bringing in the 2 words, every day. Not doing something heroic every day because we don't have those opportunities every day. thank goodness. But being present and aware and being cognizant, knowing what's happening around us, interacting with people, taking our earbuds out of our ears, raising our head from 5 feet in front of us as we walk down the street, or we're, playing on words with friends on our iPhone, and notice what's going on around us, what's happening, what circumstances are taking place, so that we're present to something when it needs our attention, versus being in our own little world, in our own little tunnel, having no clue what's going on around us in the world. It takes that. We're never going to be a hero unless we're clear about what's happening around us. Like, oh my gosh, there's an opportunity to take a heroic action, take a risk, go beyond the barriers that might stop me, do it for no material gain whatsoever, and just simply do it because it's who I am, it's the values in who I am, and I'm doing it because it's the morally right thing to do. That is being a hero. And we're really out to empower people to take advantage of those moments and to know about bystander behavior, because that's the one thing that's going to get in the way, is that behavior that stops you in that moment. I joke sometimes, kind of joke, but not really joke, that it really is like an alien that comes down and takes us over in that moment, where we can't do what we want to do. We can't say what we want to say. I mean, and I really emphasize that we really do want to do something. We really do want to say something. But for whatever reason, and for many of us it has been an alien, it's been this indescribable experience where we become frozen. That for whatever reasons, we can't do what we want to do, we can't say what we want to say, and therefore we don't make the difference we want to make in that moment of time. And then we leave that situation, we feel bad about it, we remember it. I talk to people who've had situations that happened years ago that have never forgotten those moments. And we could talk a little bit more about this, we probably will in a minute. What impact does that have? What does that allow you to make up about yourself in life? And that really does have a huge impact, more than we ever imagined that it does. So we really have to look at that, explore that, and this project is about that.
Yeah, so Mike, I really like where you mentioned that it's when you're talking about the negative, when you're talking about the bystander effect, that it kind of plays on our guilt, where guilt is just a well-known non-motivator. I mean, it's almost let's throw this, oh man, I should have done that, I should have done that, and I should do this heroically. You're throwing that on in addition to, oh, I need to be working out more, I need to be eating better, I need to be,
yeah. And
all of those things become a paralyzing guilt, whereas providing that opportunity, which you do, empowers people, makes people have positive feelings about themselves. And can you share a little bit about the texting interaction that you have? Because I think that's a really important example of how that works.
Yeah, and what I love about what you said is, I really am, one of the intentions, even though it's unspoken about this campaign, is we're really out to live outside the should. I mean, because really, how much does the feeling of should run our lives? Because other people say we should do this, even though, and we struggle with, okay, I know I should eat less, I know I should work out more, I should make more money, I should do this, I should do that. We are bombarded with shoulds, and I'm really out to get rid of that, and to free us all up to come from and live our lives from what we just want to do, who it is that we are. Our values would just have us do this, not because we should, but because we want to. And I think that's a much more powerful place to come from and live your life from than should. Should then becomes a burden and an obligation, which is completely uninspiring. It's like, wow, okay, great. But when you come from and you can really look at what would it look like to live my life from what I already want to do, just because that's who I am, then I would want to look at what's in the way, what gets in the way of me living that kind of life. Then it gives you the say in how you live your life versus everybody telling you what you should do, which is not a very powerful way to live life. And so I want to address that first of all. And you brought up texting. What I implemented several months ago as I speak to my audiences, I give them, we actually start out with a conversation about who is your hero. and allow them to text me. Now, because it's not, sometimes it's weird to talk about it. People get a little shy or, whatever, and I also ask them to tell me about a moment where they've been a hero for others, and that's where really people get screwed up because they don't want to talk about it because they think it's narcissistic. It's like, who am I to call myself a hero? But it's different when they're texting to an anonymous person, and even me, but like an anonymous phone number. And the stories I get, and mostly later on in my presentation, I asked them to think, also of a situation in their life where they wanted to be a hero, where they wanted to intervene, they wanted to make the difference in that moment, and they didn't. And I asked them to share with me anonymously, even though I have their phone number, it's still basically anonymously. Tell me about that. What happened? What didn't happen? What got in your way? What stopped you from making the difference you wanted to make? And the stories that I hear are heartbreaking, and things that people carry with them literally for the rest of their life. I mean, they will go to their grave with this story. They will go to their grave with this situation where they didn't make the difference. While many come to my mind, I'll share this one that a college student shared with me that she knew that her best friend was abusing drugs, and it was getting to a problematic point. And whether it's things that she literally asked her best friend, like, can you help me here? And the best friend didn't take time, didn't have time, didn't know what to do, didn't know where to go with it, didn't know how to help her. So she kind of skirted over the issue and didn't get her any help, her best friend. And 2 months later, her friend was found dead from an overdose. And this person, her best friend, is left with this for the rest of her life. And go ahead and mention that it's in these moments that we make decisions about ourselves. And we beat ourselves up, and we're like, wow, I must be a real loser, that I couldn't have even helped my best friend. I couldn't have taken time out of my own life to get what she needed, to help her when she needed it, to do whatever I needed to do to find whatever there was to be found to help her get through this situation. I was a bystander. And she, in that moment, made a decision about her life, and she's left with that forever.
Let me jump in really quick, because I think this is really fascinating, Mike. This is, it's precisely those sorts of heartbreaking stories that really call to mind the topic that you talked about just a minute ago, this idea of replacing should with want. And I want to sort of push you on this, because I think it's really, really fascinating. Is want necessarily going to be enough of a motivator, even if should doesn't work out to be as good a motivator as we want it to be? What I'm thinking of here, when I think of this story that you just told about this college student, surely the college student would want to help the best friend, but perhaps didn't feel either capable of doing it or knowledgeable enough to do it, or didn't feel like this was an absolutely necessary time or whatever. I mean, I'm reminded of all of these sort of conversations that have taken place in film and in television and in the history of philosophy about how to get people to do the right thing, right? And so, I mean, ultimately, that's what we're talking about here.
Yep.
What is it that gets people to do the right thing? Is it necessarily the case that people always want to do the right thing? Or do we need to do something, get them primed in some way so that they will, even if they don't want to at the particular moment when it becomes necessary to do something?
Okay, well, a couple of different answers to that. I love that question. So first of all, and I don't know if some of this is going to be idealistic or me just coming from the glass is always half full that I live my life from, but first of all, I really think the opportunity is how I want to get my mind sorted out here. First of all, I believe, again, and I don't know that this is idealist, I believe when you take away all the reasons not to, that we really do all want to make that difference. I don't, if you take away all the past decisions we've made about ourselves and about life and all the reasons not to and all the time elements and the lack of information, the lack of what do I do, all that stuff, if you take all that away and simply come from your values and your soul and who we are as human beings, I really want to believe, and I really do believe, that we all want in that moment. But I think you're right. I think you're right on the button. I don't think want is enough. I think you have to come, but I think want is a start. I think you then, the opportunity that we don't always take advantage of and elevate this is to take the want to a need. Like, I need to do something here. Like, life depends on me doing something here. And in this situation that I brought up, life did depend on it. And we lost a life out of it. So when you can live from life depends on it, and whether it be literally life, like people being alive, or life, like living life with vitality and happiness, life depends on it. That's a different way of approaching it. You hold yourself accountable at a different level than, well, I'd like to do this, I want to, but I got other things pulling at me, so I'm going to do those too, because I want to do those too. I want to go out to eat tonight versus stay in and help a friend. But when you come from, I need to do this, like life depends on it, that's going to steer you in the direction that of intervention and help and keeping someone safe, that something else pulling at you will not win.
Yeah, so last week's guest, Zeno Franco, has described this moment of performing the heroic action to be essentially a compulsion, we see something that so disturbs our internal value set that we feel compelled to act. And I think that's really telling, because I think that's what makes, in a lot of cases, that's what allows, or not allows, but that's how we see one person acting when others don't. I think it has to do, I think a lot of heroes have spent time thinking about what their values are and spent time, looking at them and being deliberate about it, so that it is clear when something disagrees a lot with their internal values. And one of the, I guess, less risky situations or examples is when someone tells a racist joke in a crowd. To some people, that's going to really visibly shake them, and it's such a violent disagreement with their values that they have to act. Whereas others, it maybe isn't enough for them to overcome the pressures of the group or whatever it might be. And so, and obviously there's some people who would probably follow up with another racist joke. So there's I think that's and then maybe that's a topic for another episode. But there's a lot about this idea of acting when we see something that's so disagreeable to our character, it's our upbringing, our study, or whatever it might be.
And I think all of that is what would create the need.
What you're talking about there, Matt, and I think this feeds in really nicely with what Mike wants to do, right? There's all that work that has to be done prior to that moment, right? So if it's a question of things that disrupt our value system, ultimately you need to have already done this sort of careful thinking about what you value and what your morals are, what your belief system looks like, and why you hold those values and beliefs. So many people, I think, don't do that work, right? Students that I see every semester in class, I ask them, well, why do you believe what you believe? And they've never heard that question before. And I do think that this speaks to the kind of project that Mike has in mind, right? Effectively starting people on that path, getting them to start looking at these sorts of questions is a really effective way to prime people for the heroic moment, if you will.
Yeah, I think it's a much deeper conversation than people anticipate it being. I think it goes down really to the depths of who we are, that just what you just said, Ari, people don't wake up thinking about. They don't wake up asking themselves that questions, and then they're thrown when somebody else asks them the question. And we are not designed to inquire that deeply into who we are and what has us give our values, our beliefs, and what does create that want, and then what takes that want up into a need. It's not an ordinary conversation.
Yeah. Mike, I've got another question for you. Last week you wrote kind of an introductory piece for your new website, which I don't know if you've mentioned yet, but is raproject.org.
I love that you mentioned it again.
If you missed it the first six times that Mike read it out, it's raproject.org. You answered a question that I think anyone that's working in heroism gets, and that is, what is a hero? And you've done a great job of laying out your thoughts, and they're very much aligned with the Heroic Imagination Project. But the piece that I'd like you to talk about is you address there's a discomfort in this idea of striving to be a hero that kind of clashes with this idea that we should have humility. Can you talk about how you addressed this discomfort at the title of hero, and also maybe what prompted you to address it?
Yeah, and I touched on it even previously in one of my comments, and I'll expand on it here. We get really uncomfortable, and I think, granted, there's all different interpretations of the word hero, and that's one reason it compelled me to write this blog post, again, at raproject.org. And because, not only do we have different interpretations, but we have, every person has a different relationship to the word and the meaning and the interpretation and the concept of hero and of heroism. But I think mostly, generally speaking, we have a very uncomfortable relationship with it. Not so much in calling someone else a hero, and that's oftentimes thrown around, and it's even thrown around, to my opinion, inappropriately and in inappropriate situations. But it's kind of loosely used or too quickly used. Again, that's my opinion. And I think it tends to water down real heroism and what it really is. And it really is that person that takes a risk, that goes beyond something, that takes an action and does it for no material gain whatsoever just because they fulfilled a need to act. But we get really uncomfortable, and we mostly are uncomfortable when it comes to calling ourselves a hero or even someone else calling us a hero. How many times you see in situations where people will be called a hero and they're like, oh no, I'm not that. Oh no, I'm not a hero. And they just get really uncomfortable, like it's narcissistic or egotistical. And I do believe it's because, first of all, it's embarrassing. A lot of people are embarrassed by acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is very rare, and calling someone a hero is a form of acknowledgement, and we get really screwed up when we're acknowledged. People just can't be with it. But I think it's because, if you go a little deeper, and this kind of touches on, this is a deeper conversation than what we normally have, I believe because it contradicts how we relate to ourselves. We, at some point in our lives, told ourselves something. We sentenced ourselves to something. Like a judge sentences somebody for the rest of their life to something, we sentence ourselves to a life of not being worthy, not being good enough. I can't do that. And it could be from you tried something and it didn't work. You tried to be a hero. You tried to stand up for somebody. You tried to intervene and it didn't go well, or it completely fell flat on its face, or maybe it had a negative impact. And you're like, well, clearly I'm not designed to be a hero. I'm not going to try that again. And we not only start to build evidence to validate that, we start elevating that sentence. Like, not only can I not be a hero, I'm just a loser in life. I just can't do anything. And not that we all do it to that level, but a lot of times it becomes an unspoken relationship to ourselves that becomes the context for how we live our life, how we approach work and relationships and other people and other situations, especially when we see another situation like what we might have seen one time that we did act and we made the decision. We're like, oh, not going to try that again. Did it once, didn't go that well. Nope, going to turn around and walk away, going to stay silent, going to not do a damn thing here. Because I don't want to subject myself to what happened back whenever in my life that it didn't go so well. And then it just impacts our relationship and how we relate to ourselves as a human being. Therefore, when we are called a hero or we do something great, we invalidate it. Either to someone else, like, no, I'm not that, or when we do something great for someone else, we invalidate it to ourselves, like, oh, it really wasn't no big deal. I mean, I was at the right time, the right place, or, oh, and then we kind of tuck it away. And that's where we really are screwed up. And it's something I'm out to debunk with this project through, enticing and inspiring people to upload videos on our website, raproject.org, to share their real stories of when they were a hero or when somebody was a hero for them. So you get to see real life situations and get to hear real life stories. Reality TV is so big today, and I think while there's so many train wrecks out there that we can't stop watching, there's also those biggest, world's biggest loser, situations, and The Voice, where people fulfill dreams. They're real, everyday, ordinary people telling their stories, and we get to hear ourselves in them. That's one of my intentions of this campaign, is whether through the written word or through the spoken and video word, you get to be inspired and wow, I'm not alone. I relate to these people. And it may inspire others to get in touch with their own hero within them, because we all have it.
Fantastic. So we're going to step away from raproject.org for a minute. Ari, maybe you can introduce this article that we saw in Inc.
Well, then you want to ask me a question?
Yes, we're going to finish with your question, so you can take us out, Mike. And I think you've got something to contribute to this quick discussion too on this article. So Ari, if you can kind of frame it for us and start off that discussion.
Sure. Yeah, this was the piece that you passed along to me earlier this week, Matt, and it sort of told the story of this. The author who, with his family, went to the opera, his wife and his young daughter, and at the break they went to have something to eat in the restaurant. The appetizer came. The father was so pleased about their cultural event and how everything was going along so well, and they were raising their child to enjoy a night at the opera and so on. But as soon as the food was put on the table, the child behaved like a child and grabbed the food and didn't offer some to the parents first and so on. And the father was just aghast, and then the whole the sort of idea behind the article was, of course, how to respond to this circumstance. And at first, the author thought, well, I'll admonish the child. But then he thought about one of his own heroes, and that is Gandhi, and thought, well, how would Gandhi respond to a challenge like this? And so what he decided to do instead of admonishing the child was when a dessert course was served, he said, no, I can't have any dessert because I have to think carefully about how I've failed you as a father such that you would behave this way instead of nicely eating the food and sharing it with your parents, which would be the appropriate thing to do. And the child, of course, was very upset and cried and said, no, please, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I'll behave better, and so on. And of course, I thought the idea behind it, that is, thinking about what our heroes would do in a given situation, now that's a really fascinating idea. It's something that we talk about all the time as a sort of a motivator for right action. But I thought that the way that the author of the piece understood his hero was problematic. That is to say that the answer, what would Gandhi do, turned out to be shaming your child. And certainly while Gandhi thought that shaming the British into proper action with regard to India was appropriate, and I think we can all see that as appropriate. Perhaps it doesn't work in the same way when you're dealing with your child rather than colonial power. And so I just thought, how fascinating to have this idea that's so right. That is, how do we stop what we're going to do, right? How do we put the brakes on the immediate response that we want to have and instead say, what would my hero do? And that, therefore, changes my behavior. But unfortunately, in this case, it changed it in a way that perhaps would not have lined up so well with what the hero would have done himself.
Right, right. It was kind of an example of focusing on negative and rather than providing an example of what the behavior should have been. We have this sort of, I'm just going to think about what I did wrong and make you feel bad. Part of my efforts are to provide teachers examples of how to, or what kids can do. A lot of the times it's very easy for us to focus on telling people what not to do rather than what to do. And I think, Mike, that's essentially what your transition has been, from focusing on saying don't be a bystander to be a hero, and this is how you can be a hero, is so much more valuable. And I think a great part of that article was the last third of it, where this Hitendra Wadhwa basically gives us some examples from research on how having a hero, having someone you admire, look up to, or someone who inspires you can really affect your behavior. And I think that's such an important and powerful piece of information to know and to own. One of the examples was from a book by Heidi Halvorsen, where students in college were given profiles, basically like quick one-page profiles on people who had been very successful through work and effort, and like Nobel Prize winners and such. That once having read those profiles, the students then were much more committed to learning and getting through, through effort. And I just think, wow, what a great tool for any educator to have is, let's get a bunch of exemplar heroes to share with students when we want them to behave in a certain way. So if we want them to behave respectfully, let's show them 5 stories of people who were very good at showing respect. And I just find that absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, and I think it's the idea that you and Mike have both been talking about, right? For Mike's website, uploading these stories or videos, and the thing I like most about that, that takes it a little bit in a different direction, is that it's everyday heroes, right? It's people like us who are doing the action that we want to model. Yeah, so you don't only have to say, well, how would Gandhi behave, or how would Martin Luther King behave, or I don't know, how would Tom Brady behave? Instead, you can look to these people and say, well, here's someone who's actually like me. They have a normal job, or they're a college student, or have a family, and they did this thing that I regard as choice-worthy, right? This is the sort of thing that I wish I could do when presented with the same situation. And now you have that story. You have it in mind. You keep it with you. And again, as we've been talking about, this is that sort of priming, right? It gets you to think about what you believe the right action would be. And why you think it's right. Why do you identify with this person who did something that was challenging, but that in the end there were all these great, albeit difficult to do, these great results, right? And then you say, well, how can I pull that off in a similar situation? I think that's really what's so critical.
Yeah. Yes, I'd like to throw in a yeah, but in here. I absolutely agree with you, absolutely. And we always, and unfortunately, have to be cognizant of sometimes even those heroes can come down from the pedestal. They're also human beings. Case in point, this past year, I think you would ask most people in this country who is a hero football coach, and they would say Joe Paterno. And he came down off that pedestal. And, and he didn't do what people would think that he should have done. So we got to be careful. Gandhi even had his faults. I mean, we can't forget that while we have heroes, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have heroes at all, we also, I think one of the most disturbing things that happens to people, and you saw it at Penn State with the riots, student riots is people can't handle when that person comes down from the pedestal. And so really it takes us back to, while I'm not poo-pooing the idea of having somebody that you emulate at all, but still don't use that as the crutch to coming from your own values. What would you do? Who cares, really, really, who cares what anybody else would do? What would you do if you took away all the reasons and all the excuses and all the justifications for why you shouldn't do something, and strictly came from, what do I need to do here because my values are driving what I do in this moment? Who cares what Joe Paterno would do, or Gandhi, or whoever? It's your say in what you're going to do, and that's the most powerful situation.
Absolutely.
And also, I think there's also situations where we don't even think that much. And I'm going to use the same example. I know we could talk for hours about this, but when Coach McCreary walked into that shower that afternoon, I don't think there was time to think, what would my hero do? That required an immediate, impulsive, emergency action, heroic action in that moment. As I always say, take one of the benches and beat Sandusky against the head. That's not positive. That's not coming from positive psychology at all. That's doing whatever it takes to be done to keep a 10-year-old boy safe.
Absolutely. I think that with using heroes, we need to make sure that we're focusing on their actions rather than saying this person is a hero of all time. And you're exactly right. Any hero can be we can find faults with. I wrote an article probably last year sometime focusing just on that, because there are detractors from Gandhi, there are detractors from Mother Teresa, there are detractors from Martin Luther King, and they all have valid points. So it's important to focus on the actions. I think we could talk a lot about that last comment, Mike, but we do want to make sure that our pod vidcasts are relatively digestible. So I want to end with a question that we're going to ask all of our guests, and that is, who is your hero and why? Okay.
First of all, just to wrap all that up too, there is a blog post on my blog about Coach McCreary and how we're all Coach McCreary. So just to kind of wrap that up, because I know it's a big conversation, if anybody wants to go to my website and read that, it just gives my perspective on it. So my hero, I love telling this story, and I actually tell this story in my keynote when I go around the country speaking. And this is one of those that I'll never forget. And most of us have those stories of our hero that we'll never forget. But I was in 8th grade, and I had not only just been selected as the drum major for the junior high band, which is a big deal at 8th grade, but I'd also been elected by my peers as band president. So I thought I'd achieved the ultimate. I was on the A-list in my own fictitious way, whatever the A-list is, and I had made it. In 8th grade, I had made it. And so there was a certain day, we wore our uniforms, band uniforms, to class all day on game day, because we had the pep rally in the morning, game in the afternoon. We wore them to class so we didn't change clothes. So this particular game day, I had my drum major uniform on. Now, I was here to tell you that it wasn't the most masculine thing in the world. It was very feminine, had big, puffy, green satin sleeves that banded at the wrist, and they were flowing and beautiful and very feminine. And I'm walking down the hall with my friend Mark Dudley, and as I went through the A-list part of the hall, the cheerleaders, the popular people, the athletes, all those people we all want to be like, right? We just all we aspire to be accepted by that group in these developmental years of our lives. I started in that moment, for the first time really I can remember in my life, being called names like fag, sissy, homo, queer, and it was really impactful on me. And I was embarrassed, but I didn't want to let people know I was embarrassed, and especially embarrassed next to Mark, my best friend, and I could tell he was uncomfortable, but neither of us said anything to each other or to nobody intervened in that moment. So there were no heroes in that moment. I was left with that as an experience. And that was on a Tuesday. Our games were on Tuesday. He said, why don't you come over Friday night and we'll hang out, which we did several, from time to time. So my mom dropped me off on Friday night around 7 o'clock, and I go to his front door of his house, and he had a handwritten note that says, "Come around to the garage," which I didn't think much about. It's kind of odd, but I thought, okay, well, we're going to play basketball or something. So I walk around. It's one of these garages that you turn around the corner and walk into. It's a double, garage, and the garage door was up. There's about 100 to 150 of my classmates there, and it was all decorated with balloons and streamers and big banners all around the garage that says, "Mike, we're proud of you." And in that moment, I went from being a loser, being, whatever, all that stuff that I made up about myself based on what those people were saying that Tuesday afternoon. I then really got that people love me, that I matter, that I am worthy, and all that. It was what Mark did for me, putting that together, which he didn't have to do. He was my hero in that moment, because he allowed me to really get that it's not what those people say, it's really who I am, that I do matter in life. And whenever I started having this conversation, Mark immediately came to my mind, because I've never forgotten that. And I think for most of us, we never forget our heroes. We never forget those people that, as in my interpretation, that take a risk. They go beyond the barriers of, oh, I don't have time, I can't do this, I don't have what it takes, blah, 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 all the reasons. We do something to help somebody else, and we don't do it for any material gain. And that was Mark Dudley for me. And so that's my hero.
Thank you. Ari, do you want to close off the show for us?
Yeah, thank you both. Mike, thanks for coming on, and thanks for that great story, a really good way to end our time together here today. Thanks to everyone for watching. Of course, you'll see us here every week. If you're on Google+, you can comment and watch along to the live broadcast. Otherwise, of course, you can find it on iTunes. You can find all of us at our websites, which should show up here as soon as we're done. Thank you, Matt, again, and we'll see you all next time.